The sky is fading in its colour. The light is setting in the west. The blue skies of the day give way to the richer colour palette of violets and soft yellows as the long rays of the evening sun reflect within the clouds that fill the horizon. Night is on its way. Darker clouds draw in from the north, begin to fill the scene. In the last spot of light before night closes in, the final scenes of the day unfold beneath the gaze of the buildings of the Schloss Freiheit. An elegant row of baroque buildings that with the light at the end of the day shine as if built beneath the Tuscan sun. They line the banks of the river, rising 4 stories high. Sunshades drawn out and down, protecting the occupants and plants upon the balconies. One resident peers over the railings at the 2 workmen who, from a small boxed wooden boat, are unloading supplies through the service entrance upon the river. Near to the men unloading, a washing line holds the garments of a home out to dry above the waters. The buildings, as splendid as they are, do much to hide a greater splendour. For over the steeply pitched roofs rises a great neoclassical balustrade that flows into the great octagonal tower and domed roof of the Schloss, in which is contained the chapel of the king. Strange that such a view should be obscure to the onlookers who either, in going about their daily business, or who are enjoying the last rays of the summer sun, are upon the banks of the River Spree opposite. The bands of black holding white within its centre, the Prussian eagle stretches its wings, flutters the flag of Prussia. High on a mast it flies of a ship, pulled to dock against the stone walls of Schinkel, who sought to contain the great River Spree. The old maritimer takes rest at the end of the day from atop the stone steps. A peaked cap shields his brow as he gazes upon his boat shored on the river. It is from this river that a water carrier fills his wooden barrel that lays on top a cart with jugs of water pulled from the Spree. 2 jugs of a few litres at a time to fill a barrel of hundreds of gallons. A maid, decked in working clothes and mop cap, holds the shoulder of a young girl as she peers over the railing down upon the water. Her brothers play in the street as the parents, dressed in fine tailored clothes, the father in top hat, the mother in bonnet, carrying a parasol, chat with a woman of equal upper-class standing, her daughter dressed in the finest style of the day at her side. For the woman not so privileged in wealth, she holds her children near, her clothes darkened by the work of the day, but she smiles as she embraces 2 of her children. Her oldest, however, stands at the railing also looking upon the river. 2 halves of the same society, oh so very different. Nearby a dog barks at the horse of a wagon. A dog with a complexity issues. The great black horse looks over, the brown horse looks at the nuisance that this little scruffy animal represents before him. Neither are aware of the white dog that has managed to climb upon the cart itself and is feasting on the wares held within the sacks. Neither is the seller to which the cart belongs, as he holds conversation with a fisherman who carries his rod in a pouch, takes rest upon one of the boxes of the seller's wares as they hold conversations, and the fisherman's child swings his fishing rod as if it were a sword of a soldier who now wanders the embankment with his compatriot, both dressed in their military regalia. In the street, a child and its mother move from the door held open by a gentleman dressed in white that will lead them into the fared omnibus that awaits to take them on their way, whilst an industrialist stands in black tailcoat and top hat, his back on the historic past as he looks on to the gardens that are overshadowed by the red brick facade of the not quite 20-year-old Bau Academy that heralded a new time for construction within the city. However, there is an oddity. Standing near Schinkel's Schlossbrücke, which tells the story of a hero and his struggles, the ancient god standing at his side, stands a man who, unlike all the other figures, has caught in our gaze, as we have perused the scene before us. He stands dressed in a fine brown long coat, a white shirt with neckerchief tucked within, well-shined black shoes, a high top hat in grey upon his head, and a cane within the grasp of his hand. He's a soft-faced man with a pointed jaw. He had taken the time for an evening walk with his dog and paused himself to enjoy the afternoon light, which is now how he and his dog have caught our stare. His name is Eduard Gärtner, and he stands to the right of his own name. In 1855, in the capital of Prussia, Berlin, in a painting by his own hand.
Acthung, Acthung. Hier ist die Sendestelle Berlin. Im Voxhaus. Meine Damen und Herren.
Welcome to Acthung History, a podcast produced by theberlintourguide.com and presented by Simon J. James. This week, Painting Berlin, Eduard Gärtner. For the paintings described in this podcast, visit theberlintourguide.com/Acthung History and visit the transcript for this show. They offer a window into a past of a city that has always found itself in a constant state of flux, never remaining the same for long, always changing, be it through industry, revolution, or war, has become very much part of the fabric of Berlin. Whilst the invention of photography has allowed for scenes of a city in later periods to be captured, the works of Eduard Gärtner provide a glimpse into a past that could not have been captured with technology, but instead the eye and the hand of great painters become our windows into a past and history of the ever-changing city. Johann Philipp Eduard Gärtner was born in Berlin on the 2nd of June 1801 to an English chairmaker. However, he was born into a time where Europe was suffering from a blight of egos. In France, the first consul, Napoleon Bonaparte, was exerting his prowess over the battlefield and heightening the influence of his policies over much of Europe, and it would not be long before the troops of Napoleon marched in Berlin. In 1806, Berlin fell, and a change in the situation of the economy of the city led Gärtner's father to lose his occupation. With a wife, Caroline, and son to support, life was not going to be easy. It was such that, in order to solve the family's situation, Gärtner's mother left Berlin with the young boy for Kassel. Kassel itself would not remain spared from the march of Napoleon on Europe, and whilst the Gärtner and his mother resided there, in 1807, Kassel became the capital of the Kingdom of Westphalia, under Napoleon's brother, Jerome. It was during this time and under the Kingdom of Westphalia that Eduard Gärtner would begin on his artist's journey. His mother, employed within the royal court as a gold embroiderer, was able to arrange for the tutelage of court artist Franz Hubert Müller, who would begin the training of the young boy when he reached the age of 10. For 2 years he studied under Müller, until 1813 and the Befreiungskriege, when finally the dominance of Napoleon met its end, with the ill-planned march into Russia in 1812 and the turning of the tide of war against Napoleon with the decisions of Ludwig Graf von York and the subsequent coalition of Prussia and Russia through 1813 that led to Napoleon's defeat in 1814. It was in 1814 that the 13-year-old Gärtner would return to a Berlin and Prussia liberated from and victorious over Napoleon and France. With the defeat of Napoleon, Berlin was able to begin a return to an economy that had been destroyed under Napoleon's regime. With the king's return to rule, the bourgeois that had become a frugal or had fled returned to the liberated city of Berlin and began to spend money once again. New chairs were ordered, curtains hung, and porcelain dining sets demanded to serve guests at the increasing number of dinner parties being hosted in the palais and mansions of the bourgeois and noble elite. For the Königliche Porzellanmanufaktur, founded in 1763 by Friedrich der Grosse, the increased amount of orders demanded for more painters and apprentices to be trained. In 1814, Gärtner began an apprenticeship with KPM. If he was expecting to continue in the vein of his former master in the now defunct Kingdom of Westphalia, he was to be sorely mistaken. Through 6 years of training, his hand was taught to draw the careful borders, the swirling whips of gold and decorative lines, rather than scenes or sketches of cityscapes or architectural details for which his former teacher Müller was specialized in. In leaving KPM in 1820, Eduard Gärtner sat down to complete his first self-portrait. In pencil, and perhaps using a convex mirror, he sits astride a tall stool. Whilst the face begins to show the promise of a budding artist, understanding light and shadow, angles and geometries, the disproportion of scale between hands, torso, legs, and feet create a self-portrait that is quite hard to gaze upon. However, there was promise, and an encounter later would truly influence his work. Carl Wilhelm Gropius ran a theatre stage production workshop. Through this workshop, he created the set designs for the Schauspielhaus that stands today on Gendarmenmarkt as the Concert House. He himself had trained under the architect of the Schauspielhaus, the eminent and brilliant architect of Berlin, Karl Friedrich Schinkel, before founding his business in 1821. In founding his business, he needed apprentices, and artists, and the young Eduard Gärtner caught his eye. Gärtner was brought to work with Gropius that very year, and in doing so, he also came to work with Schinkel, who amongst architecture designed staging. Working with Schinkel and Gropius on staging of palaces, rolling hills of Italian countryside, he would gain one of the traits that would define himself as a painter, the skills of vendute, the realistic capturing of landscapes in architecture. For 4 years, he would help finish the designs of Gropius and Schinkel, bringing the worlds of opera and theatre to life and ever increasing his talents. When in 1824 came around, Eduard Gärtner would receive his first commission from Friedrich Wilhelm III, King of Prussia. The piece, today, is exceptionally important, for it shows the Berliner Dom Cathedral, long since demolished. Using the talents he gained under Schinkel and Gropius, Gärtner set about capturing the grandness of the interior of the church that had been once laid down in a simplistic baroque by architect of Friedrich the Grosse, Georg Wenceslas von Knobelsdorff, but in recent years been redesigned by Carl Friedrich Schinkel as he continued to put his neoclassical stamp upon Berlin. The long hall stretches out before the viewer. Corinthian columns support an arched roof indented with the designs reminiscent of the Pantheon of Rome, beneath which rows of wooden pews stretch forth towards the altar. Although the windows of the side cannot be seen, Gärtner shows the light shining through. The wooden framing of the panes of glass shown in the 2 bursts of light on the canvas, one when the light hits a column on the right, and once again as it falls before 2 people caught in prayer. Only 2 other people are depicted. Gärtner chose to focus on the space as a whole, rather than the people that would often fill it. The painting was a great success when it was put on display for the first time during an exhibition of the Berlin Academy later the same year. People started to flock towards him, throwing commissions his way, and finally the son of a chairmaker started to earn a living. Such was the money earned from the commissions that he was able to afford a 3-year stay in Paris. Painting happily away, he began to build on skills that would make the scenes he painted, the Vendute paintings, grow in popularity as they arrived back in Prussia. His scenes displayed life and energy. They were composed not to show a moment, but to show a city and its functions within one window extending from the frame. Whilst Gärtner could have sought to frame Berlin, to paint what one sees, he decided, however, to create a window into the world, a point of access to a city, and also to those that lived in it. Within his paintings, he not only painted the people, the different classes that called the city home, but those that he admired or those who were his friends. Upon his return to Berlin, in 1828, he began to capture the city in this way, and from this period comes the Vendute, die Klosterstrasse. It is a scene that, as the much later painting of the Schloss Freiheit would also show, plays with light and life. From the relatively cold interior painting of the Berliner Dom, from which Gärtner had begun his professional career as a painter of architecture, with its single piece of beautifully placed light, but a painting predominantly in a singular blanket of light, Gärtner had flourished. Die Klosterstrasse shows a street, Klosterstrasse, from the entranceway to the Grünerstrasse, where Gärtner's eye begins, south toward the parochial Kirche. The morning sun has risen over the rooftops and cast a golden light upon the right-hand side of the street, bathing Gärtner's friend Schinkel's English-inspired design of the Gewerbe Institute in rich morning golden hues, whilst the left-hand side remains in the darker blues of the remains of the night. To emphasize the distance and create perspective with which he began to work with in his self-portrait of 1820, the parochial Kirche is amongst a haze, and its white walls, still very much under the dark, are in contrast not only to the light on the Gewerbe Institute, but also to the shadows that hang over the left-hand side of the street. It is amongst this dark that the new building of the Gymnasium of the Grauen Kloster rises, scaffolding climbing the side of the building, whilst workers lay the final bricks that will cap out the square tower of the building in a neo-Gothic Baltic brick design. Again, as before, the streets are full of life. An Italian greyhound, a favourite of Friedrich the Grosser, plays with a black cat, whose tail is curled as it snarls at the playful hound. A horse-drawn carriage pulls straw through the street for the many stables that are hidden in courtyards behind the elegant facades. There is family life. A young boy carries with him a ladder, a mother holds the hand of a child clad in white, and there is a business to be discussed. He also included his eminent colleagues of the day. Before the Gewerbe Institute, the founder, Beuth, walks with architect Schinkel, and in front of the former wool warehouse upon the left, in the building before the new building of the Grauen Kloster, walks Christian Daniel Rauch, the great sculptor, and his colleague Karl Wilhelm Wach, both of whom hold studios within the former wool warehouse. Finally, at the centre of the painting, a gentleman approaches a rider upon horseback. This is Gärtner on foot, meeting the painter of great equestrian scenes of Berlin, Franz Krüger. Not only is Die Klosterstrasse a vendute of Berlin as a city, but a vendute of life within it. It offers avenues to its celebrities with teasers to explore further, whilst also functioning as a map. Beuth and Schinkel tell us that they are involved in the buildings to which they stroll past, as does Rauch and Wach, standing before their studio. Die Klosterstrasse allows us a view and an explanation into a city that a photograph simply could not capture. Sadly today, much of the street was lost in British and American heavy aerial bombardments over Berlin, especially of the 3rd of February 1945, and further lost in the grand socialist rebuilding scheme of the Deutsche Demokratische Republik. The same could be said for many of the buildings within the 1833 painting of Berlin's Spittelmarkt and its Getraudenkirche. Again, Gärtner captures a city in the thralls of life. He captures the varying size of structures that represent the changing building blocks through time of the city, from the small single or double-storied buildings of Berlin beginning its history as the capital of Prussia, to the 3- and 4-storied buildings of the simple neoclassical elegance that would become the basis for the architectural style of the city through to the First World War. But our main focus is upon the Getraudenkirche, a church that stretched in some form its history to the 15th century, but carries the signs of dilapidation and age. Its render fallen from the walls, exposing the brick construction, its clock face dull and illegible, and doors closed. Before it, a woman works one of Berlin's hand pumps that can still be found on the streets of the city today, and she fills a bucket, the overspill of water running into the open drainage gutter that carries waste away. The square is busy with the hub of a market day, with traders offering their wares from stalls or also from the curb on which they sit. It's a scene that, unlike with some of Klosterstrasse, cannot be replicated today. The church was demolished during the urban reorganization of Leipziger Strasse in the 1880s, the buildings destroyed during the air raids, and the few that remained flattened to make way for a wider road and high-rise apartment buildings. Gärtner's Spittelmarkt becomes our window into a Platz lost. Gärtner was entering his most productive period in his painting career, despite having a new family. He had married a year prior to the display of Die Klosterstrasse to a 21-year-old Henrietta Carrel, with whom he would have 12 children, 8 of which would survive into adulthood. However, the entry into parenthood did not steal him from his art. Rather, in fact, he found solace and reclusiveness within painting, only acting the father on Sundays, which he took as a day of rest, and on family holidays. Yet family did feature in his most brilliant and important work. Friedrichswerder Kirche, built by Schinkel, is one of Berlin's most important architectural sites. The most southerly example of Baltic Gothic brick building techniques, its thin and long footprint on the city and twin towers are a remarkable, if small, sight to see. It was from the roof of this red brick building, that inner hut that Gärtner had created for himself to shield himself and his work from the elements, that he began to paint upon an initial sketch. The idea, to capture a panorama of Berlin, to preserve a cityscape from a singular 360-degree perspective, and also to capture Berlin, a city that industrialization had not yet arrived to, but the great smoke of was looming on the horizon, for in just a few years, Borzig would found his ironworks and steam locomotive manufacturing plant and begin the industrialization of pleasant and quaint baroque Berlin. The panorama, consisting of 6 panels, was premiered in 1834 and purchased by the King Friedrich Wilhelm III in 1836 for the Schloss Charlottenburg. A year later, Borzig founded his factory, and the columns of neoclassicism were replaced with the columns of industry, spewing out the black dust of burnt coal, where dark not only fell with the setting of the sun, but also with the clouds of pollution that would epitomize the mass industrialization of Western Europe at the same time. Falling into the panorama of Gärtner, we find a city of beauty and greenery. Beginning with the panel that looks northeast, we see Museum Island, the central focus of which is on the Berliner Dom, which Gärtner painted and sold as his first royal commission to Friedrich Wilhelm III, the king who, after the defeat of Napoleon, began a period of culture and art in Berlin that was realized in Carl Friedrich Schinkel's colonnaded Altes Museum, seated in its splendor to the left of the Dom. In the background, behind the museum, the tower of the Sophienkirche rises from the Jewish district of Berlin, and between the Berliner Dom and the Stadtschloss, the tower of the Marienkirche, where Berlin began. The Stadtschloss itself is out of focus, pushed behind and lost behind the Schloss Freiheit, and perhaps a thinly veiled criticism of an outdated monarchy, but in the foreground the Prussian flag flies, as it does in the later 1855 Schloss Freiheit painting, upon a mast, a reference it appears that Gärtner has purposefully made. In the next panel, looking east, we see Gärtner looking on at his wife and his child, who plays happily on the lead-lined roof of the church. Gärtner has included, with the perspective, the balustrade, the towers of the church, so our view is as if we stand ourselves upon the roof and are a witness to the view that Gärtner belongs to. Here within this view, Schinkel's Bau Academy, sitting in the light, is having the finishing touches put to its facade, whilst again the Schloss fades from focus and the church of St. Nikolai, its steeples asymmetrical, one tall and pointed, and one gabled and distinct, in contrast to today's symmetrical pointed steeples. Our view then casts over the dense living districts of the Fischerinsel. Through the twin brick towers of the church we gaze off into the distance at the hill at Hassenheide, where the young men of Prussia were trained in gymnastics in the Turner movement, that restored the spirits of the young men of Prussia under the control of Napoleon, and would form the Lutzow Corps, known for the energy and superior athletic qualities. To the southwest we look over the 2 towers of the churches at Gendarmenmarkt and Schinkel's Schauspielhaus, today's concert house, at the centre of the 2 towers. An evening sun descends, and Gärtner has captured a golden hour over the city as 2 gentlemen converse as they gaze out on the splendid view in which the Kreuzberg and the memorial to the Liberation Wars, also by Schinkel, stands amongst the green fields onto which Berlin has yet to sweep over. Directly west we see the Forum Fredericianum, the Catholic Church of St. Hedwig, designed by Friedrich the Grosse's architect Knobelsdorff, with its dome of copper modelled on the Pantheon, and the Royal Library copied from plans stolen from Marie Theresa of Austria and built by Friedrich the Grosse out of spite to his arch-nemesis, and in the foreground, the Opera House. Pointing out across the scape stands the great Alexander von Humboldt, as he explains the view to her husband and wife who have made the trek up the towers that is impossible to do today. Finally, looking north, we look on to the Friedrich Wilhelm University that would, one day, come to possess the name of the distinguished brothers von Humboldt. Together it forms amongst the last views of a city teetering on the precipice of a seismic shift. Again, Gärtner has captured society and stated that a city is not merely of its buildings, but also of its people. But the panorama would be amongst the last of his Berlin works for a time. In search of the wealth that was afforded to other artists and friends such as Kruger, Gärtner would ride off to Russia in search of commissions not from kings, but emperors. His time spent in Russia was back and forth from 1837 until 1839. His work, as it did in Berlin, captured a city and its populace and provides a glimpse at a cityscape changed through war and ideology. In Russia, he arrived with no direct commission from the Tsar Nicholas I for a copy of the Berlin panorama that he had created, but nevertheless he was able to persuade the Tsar to purchase it, who gave it as a gift to his wife, Alexandra Feodorovna, also known as Charlotte of Prussia, and the eldest surviving daughter of his main patron, King Friedrich Wilhelm III of Prussia. Gärtner fell in love with the space offered by Moscow and St. Petersburg and painted profusely, but sadly many of these works are lost to us today. For Alexandra Feodorovna and for Eduard Gärtner, great sorrow came on the 7th of June, 1840, when Friedrich Wilhelm III's 42-year reign as monarch over Prussia came to an end with his death. For Alexandra Feodorovna, she lost a father, and for Eduard Gärtner, he lost a great patron. Friedrich Wilhelm IV, the son of the late king, was a man of the arts, but not in the same manner in which his father had been. His father had been a great lover of the Vendute of Berlin, perhaps because since the defeat of Napoleon he had put great effort into reforming the arts and culture of the city, but the new king was a hapless romantic. Lost to the vineyard terraces of Italy and Greece, he preferred to wander with his imagination and with the aid of art through scenes of an old world, not the current one to which Gärtner painted. The new king had, with the permission of his father, undertaken whilst crown prince a grand tour of the states of Italy, and had been bitten by the fever that ruins of a great past in the romantic settings of rolling hills in Tuscany or the great structures of ancient capitals of Rome. There was little he could do to shake it, and began drawing himself ideas for buildings in Prussia based on the Italian style. He would later realize one of the grandest ideas as the Orangerie Schloss in Potsdam, built in the Italian medieval ideal, as was much of the structures built for the royal or governmental purpose during his reign. For Gärtner, this was a disaster. He had not ventured to Italy. He had not paddled the waters of Venice, wandered in the hills of Tuscany, or passed through the medieval gates of Genoa, despite his Vendute work being comparable to those of the great Italian Vendute artist Bernardo Bellotto, also known as Canaletto. The lifeline that was provided to Gärtner was that those who admired the eye of Friedrich Wilhelm III did not die with him. For Gärtner's patrons were not as many as before, but many still recognized his talents. And within a city, after the Industrial Revolution in 1840, with a growing bourgeois class, there were still patrons willing to buy the realism of Gärtner's art over the romantic views of the Tiber. Das Wohnzimmer des Schlossmeisters Hausschild is a painting that is a testament to the changing economy of the city. Gärtner, commissioned by Karl Hausschild, captures the luxury in which the locksmith Hausschild lives as a testament to his success as a businessman. Within the painting, Gärtner once again plays with light as he depicts a family of the Hausschilds sat within the living room of their apartment in Stralauer Strasse. His family portrait is not just a portrait of a family soullessly staring at the artist or into the distance, but rather a moment's capture, as if posed for a photograph. The grandmother sits in a chair near a window. Widowed, she's dressed in black, and has her back turned to the artist. Seated not before the window, but to the side, she is in shadow, but we see her face through a reflection within a mirror, which itself sits in light, and brings her character from the isolation it suffers at the edge of the family room into the centre, as the viewer witnesses her face softly and proudly look upon her grandchildren. The mirror also interestingly closes the space, as it shows the otherwise unseen fourth wall that is behind Gärtner as he paints. Hauschild stares with a heavy brow toward the window, a gold coin testament to his financial success in his hand, as one of his daughters relaxes her head upon his knee. His wife enters the room holding another child, and two more daughters, one sat beside the mirror and the other leans onto a table with wine, meat, and a crystal decanter laid upon it. Rich, vibrant blue patterned wallpaper decks the walls, another sign of wealth and success, upon which hangs a silhouette of the wife, a painting of a windowed room, and above the door, a gentleman in military garments, perhaps Friedrich Wilhelm III. Parquet lines the floor, and crystal fills the Biedermeier cabinets, and typically, for a Gärtner painting, a cat plays with a ball of yarn. A testament to success and new methods, the painting represents the change from a system of journeymen and apprentices working with a master from a goods yard to a master enjoying the profits of the work that is now manufactured beneath him. As time progressed on, Gärtner understood as those he painted adapted to change or grasped at it, so did he. With the romanticism of the king came the romanticism of his people, a sudden increase in the want for paintings of monuments, such as the Schildhorn. The Schildhorn monument, sketched initially by the hand of the king, Friedrich Wilhelm IV, was to immortalize the event of Yaxer, former Slavic ruler of Brandenburg, submitting to the Christian Albrecht the Bear in 1157, and Yaxer hanging his shield and horn upon a tree to begin his conversion to Christianity. The sketch passed to Schinkel's student Friedrich August Stüler was brought to life. For Friedrich Wilhelm, it was intended to bring back old Christian morals to a time he felt had lost them when compared to his romanticized visions of the past. Quickly, the people of Prussia became eager to see the monument that they were hearing about, and Gärtner seized the opportunity and painted the Schildhorn in 1848, the cross on top of which blocks out the sun in a halo. Gärtner adapted to new technologies as they arrived also. The 1850s brought photography to Berlin, which, as an ever-expanding city economically as well as with population, was thriving. He acquired photographs that allowed him to make tiny corrections to his paintings that would allow for the greatest possible accuracy within his Vendute, that, despite the king's lack of interest, he still continued to paint. His 1852 painting of Unter den Linden that captures the statue by Rauch of Friedrich the Grosse looking onto the Schloss in the distance was perhaps one that used the advent of photography to enhance the accuracy. But Gärtner still added his touches of life to the paintings, the trademark leaping dog running toward the base of the statue. However, despite his efforts, his later work, much of which was watercolor rather than oil, did not live up to the successes of his past. His eyesight began to fail him, and in 1870, he, his wife, and their two unmarried daughters relocated to the scenic retreat of Ruppiner, Zeeland. Friends and family kept him busy with commissions, but the great works of his past were not to be seen again. Eduard Gärtner died on the 22nd of February, 1877. His works under the new king, Wilhelm, a soldier king, and the Germanic romanticist Kaiser slowly became forgotten. Thankfully, however, 29 years after his death, a comparative exhibition of work between Bernardo Bellotto and Gärtner rekindled interest for the great painter, as the cityscapes became as foreign to the people of Berlin then as they are now. Gärtner's paintings aided in a romanticism for the past of the people's own city, and through the 20th century, numerous exhibitions had allowed the viewers of his work to see views long gone, such as 1846's Hercules Brücke, or even the war-destroyed Stüler-designed Egyptian courtyard of the Neues Museum, to lament over or to analyze a city ever caught within the throes of change.
Acthung, Acthung. Hier ist die Sendestelle Berlin im Voxhaus. Meine Damen und Herren.
Thank you for listening to Painting Berlin, Eduard Gärtner, an Acthung history podcast produced by theberlintourguide.com and presented by Simon J. James. To find out more, visit theberlintourguide.com/Acthung history. Follow Acthung History on Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook at Acthung History, or support Acthung History for as little as €1 a month at patreon.com/Acthung History.